in a warm welcome to Brian Walmsley. Come and join us.
Thank you.
Hey, how are you doing?
Evening. Not too bad. Slightly nervous. Haven't done this before, so this is good experience. Thank you.
I was about to say you're in good hands, but that kind of sounds like I can blow my own trumpet. But hopefully you're in good hands.
Sure
Hopefully it'll feel that way by the end of it. So I want to kick us off with talking a bit about your career. So you've had a really amazing career with well-known brands, but I'd love to hear the story of how you decided to go it alone and what kind of led you to that.
So thank you, and lovely to see you all. Thanks for coming out and hearing the ReBorn story. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope it's useful for you as well. So yeah, how did I come up with ReBorn? There's a three-parter to that, and we can delve. So part of it's like your background, right? We're all products of our upbringing, and so on. I had particularly both idyllic and tragic start to life. So we can go down that road if we're going for the full-on kind of therapy session. So more than happy to. Then there's a kind of professional career development. So as Nat said, I had kind of best part of 20 years corporate. I'm older than I look, shall we say. So I was at Johnson & Johnson, where I did everything from junior brand manager through to marketing director, including KY jelly and baby oil. I had particularly interesting focus groups in Exeter nightclubs in the gay scene. So we can talk about professional background. I spent a lot of time working in homewares in the last few years. And then that probably more directly is the catalyst for this, because homewares is this huge category. We spend £7 billion a year on our homes, just on new stuff, right, for our homes. And if you walk into a Dunelm or John Lewis or an Argos, you'll see these most amazing products, so many things to choose from. But almost all of them are made in the Far East from virgin materials. So a huge amount of carbon involved in making them. And if anyone here is interested in product design, you'll notice actually, if you look at the materials, they're often kind of what they call co-molded or non-recyclable at end of life. You might have metal bits or silicon bits attached to plastic bits, etc. And as Nat said in the warm-up, then quite a few of those products, 70 million, in fact, more than a few, end up in landfill. They're non-recyclable at end of life. And, you know, I knew the customers in this space. I'd worked with John Lewis and I'd worked with others. And I said to him, isn't there a gap in the market, just purely from a commercial perspective? Isn't it a bit crazy that you walk into a food store and you might see, here's where my meat comes from, or here's where my fish comes from. But you wouldn't actually think that when you go into a John Lewis, you don't actually find out where things come from or where things are made, because actually the story is not great. It's made other side of the world from virgin materials, and it ends up ultimately in landfill. So that was a very long answer, wasn't it? But anyway, that was the gap.
No.
That was the catalyst for it. They agreed that there was a gap.
Honestly, everything you say is going to be really interesting, and we want to hear your story. So no need to apologize for long answers. We love them. It makes my job really easy as well. I'm just like, yeah, tell me more. I love hearing about that catalyst there, and like the evidence that you were seeing that said there's a gap here, and I want to, take part in exploring that. Was there anything in your kind of journey that kind of set you up for an entrepreneurial route, or was it more out of necessity, like no one's solving this problem, I'm going to have to solve it myself? Like, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, my background is very driven because of my upbringing, and then I had started 3 businesses before. So I did a student magazine, wasn't very successful. I'd worked in Tanzania and then came back and I set up a fair trade business called Fair Gift, which was kind of medium successful. And then I set up Echo in the UK, a homewares brand as well a few years ago. So I'd done other things that led me to know a little bit about how to start a business. So that helped. So yes, but it was the fact that I couldn't change large businesses from within a little bit. So I remember talking about sustainability in larger corporates and finding it quite hard to get things through, because it was dismissed as either more expensive to make things happen within large corporates or too difficult to re-engineer businesses, which is similar to cost. So actually, it's almost, in a strange way, easier to do a sustainable business from scratch sometimes than to try and re-engineer an existing business. Does that make sense? So that was another catalyst, if you like. There were a few things going on there.
Yeah. I imagine that's that experience of trying to change a big organization from within and not getting anywhere is quite a relatable story, especially for, entrepreneurs. Like I always think that the best businesses come out of a frustration of like, I'm just going to have to do this myself. Like no one else is doing it. Is there any advice that you would give for people in that situation? Maybe they're in a big organization, they want to see this change, but they're frustrated that they're not seeing it within, and maybe they have an inkling of maybe I could do this, but they're not sure. Is there any kind of advice or tips that you would give?
For sustainability specifically, I think it would be around two things. One is, I think at the senior level, most companies now get it that sustainability is important. What they can't do is kind of link that kind of lofty visions through to execution. So I think there are some that are trying to, like M&S were kind of ahead of the curve with Plan A. So I think it's kind of linking the executional stuff through to the big picture. I think is number one. I think the other thing about sustainability particularly is to frame it in terms of consumer benefit language. I think sustainability can be a bit far removed from people's day-to-day pressures of, I just want it to look good, or I just want it to work, or I just want it to actually be cheap. We have to face it, those are the primary drivers for what people need. So you have to be able to frame sustainability in those terms. So I'll give you an example is, I'm slightly obsessed by John Lewis, of course, because they're my biggest customer, but they've done this thing called the Beauty Cycle program. I don't know if you've heard of it, but anyway, you can walk into John Lewis with 5 empty bottles of anything from beauty, and then you get given back £5 off a new product in John Lewis. So just that idea of, rather than just telling everyone, look, you can recycle here, but actually there's something in it for you. So I just like that idea of taking consumers with you on the journey and linking it to a big strategy, and then giving something for them in it. So, all of my pricing, for example, is based on price downwards. I've said, okay, I research what someone's prepared to pay for a washing bowl, and then said, right, I've got to work backwards from that. I can't just do cost and then go back up. So my profitability is all over the place. There's some that I'm making good money on, and some that I'm just barely breaking even. So.
That's so interesting, because I think that someone needs to get up. Is that a wake up alarm or phone call?
Sorry, because my daughter's bed.
Oh, good night to your daughter. That's lovely. Yeah, that's really interesting, your approach to pricing, because I feel like, I'm trying to hark back to my economics days. I studied economics at uni. I can't remember any of it, but I feel like you're told the opposite, right? But I feel like what you're doing is taking a really customer-centric approach and working backwards. Is that kind of always been your
100%.
approach?
Yeah, and that, I guess, if I had some advice for people, it's to try and commercialize immediately. And that's, I almost was the death of me, but effectively I had John Lewis saying, we're ready to launch, before I had funding, before I had product design, before I had anything. So my little legs were running whilst I was in these meetings going, it's fine, we'll launch, no problem. I didn't even have a product for a while, a brand. So stress test it, get the customer, both for me it's a retail customer, route to market, as well as the end consumer. I did 3 rounds of consumer research, put stuff in front of them, found out a whole load of stuff that I was doing wrong. Putting it in front of punters, as much as possible. I
love that. So I'm from a design background as well, so that's like music to my ears. I do want to talk about your retailer experience, but I have a question before that. But before I ask that question, I'll forget this one otherwise. Do you have a really good poker face?
No, I'm rubbish.
Really? Well, how did you convince them that you're like, it's all fine?
Just through pure persistence and enthusiasm. This is just such a great opportunity. And also, John Lewis, if you think about it, they've got an existential threat from Amazon, right? So how do they differentiate from why would you shop in a department store over the next 10 years versus just going online? So it's partly to curate new brands, and partly to have a sustainability corporate point of difference versus, a big American, conglomerate. and partly selfishly, I gave it to them exclusive for 6 months. So, you know, I said, yeah, we won't sell this anywhere else apart from our own website. So there were lots of things that were in it to them. So my poker face was rubbish, but it was just, please like me.
I love that. So the learning is, if you don't have a poker face,
Yeah.
pure enthusiasm,
Be a
one or the
puppy.
other.
Yeah, be a puppy.
Be a puppy.
Learn your puppy face. Yeah, exactly.
I love that. So before we go into, you know, the retailer side of things, I am really curious about the name ReBorn, because I think it's a gorgeous name.
Thank
I
you.
really love how it speaks to what you do and the whole idea of products reborn to be used in like a new way.
Yes.
How did you come up with that? Like, was it really obvious? Was it something that took forever? Like, tell me more.
So I'm lucky enough to, so one of the best things about starting a business is you get to choose your team, right? And I love this about, you kind of create the best people that you've worked with over your entire lives. You create the team. And so I'm very lucky to work with some great people. A couple of them are here, or might even refer to George from Brunel. And there is, and one of the pieces of the puzzle were these guys, Derek and Alex, who run a tiny little design studio in Richmond called Family and Friends. And I'd worked with them previously, and they have a process. They're ex-Archie. They have a process for this. So there was a name before ReBorn, and that name was Kintsugi. Does anyone know what kintsugi is, or it's a Japanese word? Anyone heard of it before? So kintsugi is the Japanese art of basically making beautiful things out of broken things. So it's an art form in Japan. So you can, if you Google it, you'll see things like broken pottery that's kind of laced together with gold or something. Incredible thing. So you break a pot. Why not turn that back into something else? And it's an art form and a skill. So that's what this project was called, and for a long time it was going to be, we were thinking it could be branded as Kintsugi, but Derek and Alex, they're masters of their trade in terms of branding and packaging, and they said, well, actually you should go through a process of naming. So you identify all the, if you like, the truths of the company, the truths of both the functional benefits, the emotional benefits, you kind of everything. You know, I think marketing often has a triangle. Ultimately there was a triangle, and it laddered up to all the different parts of a brand, and it was through all of that work that we identified effectively the rebirth of new materials, and hence ReBorn. So it was a painful process, but it seems simple when you look back and obvious, but at the time it wasn't. Yes.
I totally appreciate that. I think branding and specifically naming is a real art form.
Yes.
I also love the reference to a triangle. I feel like every agency, if you can put it, I come from an agency background as well, and I'm like, if I can put it in a triangle, stunning.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I'm sure came through in that branding and naming process, and one of the things I really love about the story of ReBorn is how purpose and impact is very much front and center to what you're doing. And I know that I've read some lovely quotes from you about how, you know, purpose and planet and that's all, and people are always first, and everything else is second. And I'm curious from my own personal perspective as well, how have you kept that at the forefront, the idea of purpose and planet and all of that? And are there ever moments of imbalance where it's harder to maintain that stance?
A game changer for me was the Kate Raworth book, Donut Economics. I don't know if you know.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
So that reframed for me the purpose of, if you like, work and economics. I thoroughly couldn't recommend it more.
Agree.
And part of that helped me frame this mantra. And other people have used it before. I can't claim copyright on it, but people, planet, profit. Starting a business and being in life now, life's incredibly complicated. There's some stat that Adam Grant quotes, which is we're faced with 4 times as much data, information, inputs now in all of our lives than we were 30 years ago. 4 times more. Because of the internet, because of social media, because of our phones in our pockets, we're just inundated with stuff. So how do you prioritize? It was always hard, right? But to prioritize life. But how do we even now? Like, is this worth? Is this worth your time? Why would we do what we do? What are we doing tomorrow? Are all choices. So having a mantra, having a kind of North Star for decision making, I think is important in all of our lives. So my purpose and my filter for is this worthwhile doing is those three things: people, planet, profit. So and profit may seem very materialistic within that framing, but I think I can only serve other people, I can only serve the planet if what I'm doing is profitable from a sustainability perspective in the economic sense of the word. So I use that as my, if you like, filter for doing stuff is people, planet, profit. So yes, I get diverted all the time, like we all do, but I have 2 children and they are driving me nuts. But this is but wonderful human beings, and this is the way that I kind of frame my life, is around this purpose.
Yeah. And I love the point that you made there about profit, because in the collective impact program, which we'll talk about in a minute, where that you went on and I've been part of as well, one of the things that I've often heard from founders of impact brands and purpose-led brands is this discomfort around money and profit, and it being like, oh, like how serving my community but making profit feels a bit uncomfortable. And I always say, quite like what you said, is that you can't make the impact and have the grand change that you want to have without that commercially viable, profitable aspect, because it's going to wear you out, it's going to wear the business out. And so it's really nice to hear you talk about the balance of the three of them as well. Yes. And putting the consumer or customer at the heart of your business is a massive way to do that, because you're always asking people, would you buy it? The very first prototypes, when I first met George at Brunel, the very first prototypes we had were literally melted down old products. This is how we show and tell. I love this.
The very first kintsugi product, and it's literally melted down old products, because that was the idea, right? We wouldn't need any machines at all. We'd literally just melt the stuff down and then just sell it. What a great idea. And people loved it. And I just showed it to loads of people and they said, yeah, what a great idea. But then I asked, would they buy it? And they said, no, I wouldn't buy it. Of course they wouldn't. Of course they wouldn't buy it. It's a great idea though. You should do it, Brian. It's amazing, but I would never buy it. So then I had to go deeper. Like, why would you not buy it? And I wouldn't buy it because it looks dirty. I wouldn't want to cut my food. This happens to be a chopping board, but we used it for any kind of products. I wouldn't want to have it in my kitchen, and it wouldn't go with anything. It's really important to me for things to look good with the rest of my stuff in my home. It has to match. So I had this disconnect where, to your point about profit, where I had to kind of go underneath the surface to say, look, not only do you like it, but would you buy it? And so that's where having a business that's focused in on buying stuff, it's a vote, right? It's a vote, and it's no point people liking it if they're not going to buy it. So 100%. This one for the museum, I'm afraid, not not for selling.
You've hit on such an important point there about customer research, where it's not enough to ask if someone likes something or if something's good. It's like, will you part with money?
Yes.
And how much will you part with that money? And I have actually, it just reminded me of conversations that I've had more from my design days, where people have just said, it's good, do you like it? And people are like, yeah, it's good. And often they don't want to hurt your feelings.
Yes.
I remember when, I've always been taught in design that if you really want the honest answer with an idea, put a paper prototype in front of someone, something that looks like you haven't spent any effort on it, because the more high fidelity it is, even if you're tell me anything that you think, the less likely someone's going to tell you that it's really shit. So I think that's another good test of, will you buy it as well? If people are telling you all the things you want to hear, it's like, okay, but how much are you going to spend? And they're like, I wouldn't take it for free.
Very true. And it's particularly true of sustainability, where what people say and what people do, I'm afraid sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect. People want to give you the answer you're looking for, I recycle everything, and but actually in the pressures of life, people don't, or they don't do as much perhaps as they say they would. So you have to put people in a real context, take them away from what they feel they should say. And price is another one where people do and say very different things.
Yeah, I love that. I'm really glad we got onto that. And I want to ask a couple of more questions around origin stories, because I love a backstory. I can't help it. I just do. And I know that you were part of couple of programs in the early stages. So the investment readiness one and the collective impact, which we've already mentioned. And I'd love to, which is the Virgin one that Andy mentioned earlier. I'd love to hear a bit about why you chose to go on those and how did they support your early journey in starting ReBorn?
Well, yes. I mean, at risk of being an ad for Virgin Startup, it was the game changer for me, because but prior to that I was that little swan that I was talking about earlier, where John Lewis was saying, yeah, we are launching this next year, right? And I was like, yeah, of course we are. And I had literally no way of funding it. I had some of the pieces of the puzzle in. I was working with Brunel on the material science side, had won an Innovate UK grant with them. And they were also helping with the life cycle analysis to prove, which was so important, to prove the fact that, I mean, what is the carbon impact? What's the genuine sustainability impact? There's a science to that, right? And I'm not a scientist by trade, so working with Brunel was important. So I had that in place, but I had no significant funding. I did have a product designer on board who was amazing. I did have the brand team on board. So yeah, I didn't have the funding, and I didn't have. That was probably actually the single biggest thing I didn't have. Almost, maybe I had most other bits of the puzzle. So I hadn't heard of Virgin Startup Accelerator Program, but a friend of mine recommended it to me, and yeah, that was the game changer. And then I was lucky enough to meet Holly Branson through that program and pitch, and not just to her, but to many others in the program. And she made the decision to invest herself into this. And then that was a catalyst. It's not, would you mind me saying, not like the whole amount, or not even a huge amount, but that was a catalyst for then telling everyone else, the Branson family are in, are you interested? And then that was the kind of, if you like, the knock on for other people getting involved.
And I think there's something interesting about the people that you meet in, whether it's Virgin Startup or there's so many accelerators out there. And I think that it's that building of the community, and like all of you here today, if you're starting something like and online, like talk to each other, like support each other in it, like because the more people that you can meet, the more introductions you might get, or someone might know someone, and it all kind of like rolls on from there, really. So especially I think as a solo entrepreneur, and I wonder if that, we're maybe going a bit off piece, but if that's an experience that you want to talk about, of like what it's been like being a solo entrepreneur. And I know, because we often get asked about co-founder relationships and things like that, but I think it's very different when you're going it alone. How's that been?
So that's my point about connections, really. So the beauty about starting a business is you're not in the corporate. I don't think I could ever. I think I'm unemployable now.
I say that about myself.
Because once you try and set up a business, you need to think very hard about who you go into bed with as an entrepreneur, to use, that's metaphorical, for your business, because there can be relationships for years, for generations almost. So, but choosing that skill set. There's a lovely speech, I don't know if you've heard of it, where Steve Jobs does his, I don't know what you call it, valedictory or whatever, a speech at Stanford or something, where all the people who graduate, and he talks about his life lessons. And one of the things he talks about is he loved the fact he studied calligraphy. Which is an odd thing for effectively a tech entrepreneur to say, but it was the connection between that artistry of the knowing calligraphy and making connections where in disciplines where there hadn't been those connections before. And it was one of his main differentiators versus I guess it would be IBM at the time, was having that heartland of that artistry to the Apple Mac. And that came from studying calligraphy, which at the time was almost like, what's the point of that? So the reason why it links to people is because that's in many ways, your point of difference versus corporate. Like, as startup entrepreneurs, which I'm hoping that, or thinking that many of you either are or will be, what's your point of difference? And you can you both identify gaps that others are not meeting. That's what I did, number one. And number two is you can form this virtual team of skill sets that other companies start that can't copy. So for me, it was Brunel for material science and life cycle analysis. It was my product designers, Derek and Alex, with the magic of a brand that looks like nothing else in the category. It was, yes, John Lewis, because that was the route to market. So that was the more traditional, if you like, end. It was Will Davis, the Studio Davis, the product design guys, hadn't worked really in this category before. They'd worked in fast-moving consumer goods. Take different parts of your life, maybe, and that is the magic to your team. Your team is your dream. That is sorry, that was a bit of a cliche, but anyway, that
dream team.
Dream
I
team.
say it all the time.
Yes,
yeah,
indeed.
love it. Okay, let's talk about John Lewis.
Yes.
Let's have a woo for that. Like, they're stocked in John Lewis now. This is amazing.
Every store.
Woo! We're just going to sit in the clapping for a bit.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Huge congrats. This is incredible. Can you tell us a little bit about this journey? And I think particularly another question that we often get asked in these meetups is about, how do you get into retail? How do you get, one of the big names to believe in you and to take you on and trust you, really? So, yeah, how can we follow in your footsteps? We've learned the poker face versus the enthusiasm.
Maybe I cheat because I already knew them, right? So I had the relationship with me. So there's this team. It's hard being a buyer in a retail business. The people that I deal with, Emma and Michelle in John Lewis, that they're responsible for over 5,000 SKUs just in their little corner of the store. But I already dealt with them. I already sold them a couple of other products in my two previous companies. So they kind of knew me. They trusted me. I was doing the fake it till you make it thing, as I talked about. Like, I told them there was this gap. They believed me. They were in on it. And I didn't have a way to make it, but they trusted that I could do it. And in the end, I just about did. So what would my advice be is build those relationships perhaps as much as you can. Life is relationships. Business is built on people. Mm-hmm. It's often seen as quite an academic thing or a kind of distant, cold thing. But I think if Michelle and Emma were here, I have been for a drink with them. I do understand them. I understand their lives and what's important to them as people, as individuals, as well as, of course, the John Lewis bigger picture. So I tried to pitch them on every level, emotional blackmail, everything. So yeah, having a track record, number one, having evidence, number two. So I did 3 rounds of consumer research. So I told them, I showed them these products. I said, you shouldn't sell this. Here's what you do need to sell. So having the evidence, and then I came to them with the dream team as well. I presented them with Will, the product designer. Lots of evidence.
And I think the point that you made at the start there about how in their category they have 5,000 SKUs is a really important point, because it's how the question then, I imagine, if maybe you don't have the connections, is how do you stand out amongst 5,000 SKUs? Right. Like, what's your point of difference to what you mentioned before?
Yeah.
What's the hook that's really going to get someone interested? So maybe for those that don't have the connection, that context of understanding your buyer and understanding with what they're dealing with can kind of help us put ourselves in their shoes and be like, okay, what's going to stand out in that context? Because that's a hell of a lot of products to be thinking about. It is.
And I'm going to sound like a stuck record now, but the gap was the key thing.
Yeah.
So, and climate change obviously is one of the most challenging, along with poverty and war. It's the existential threats of our humanity. But it actually does create economic opportunities, because it's a market flux, and every time there's a market flux there's change, there's gaps, there's opportunities. So that was the part of the pitch, is to say we can do business differently. There is a gap here. The category is here, but we've got a gap over here.
Yeah. And to that point, so obviously sustainability, climate change, managing waste are such huge endeavors, and it really needs collective action in order to solve for them. And I really love this question that came from the community, actually, around what's your approach to collaboration and partnerships, and maybe working with others to kind of forward the cause?
Yeah, I would love to work across the industry. I was talking on the way here to Ben about how there are lots of industries facing climate change as an existential threat, and the only way we'll actually have a massive impact is through systemic change, through actually traditional competitors working together. An example would be the airline industry, where, like, if they've got to change, right, and we've got to change the way if we fly at all, like, we can't use airline fuel that it is to do. So, and airlines have to get their shit together and change fuel. And this is, it won't happen with one little airline doing it by themselves. The whole industry has to change. And for me, I would love to work on, for example, could we work on a take back scheme across all homewares, where those 70 million items a year that get chucked into landfill, why not divert those into a waste stream that can be, like the beauty cycle program for John Lewis? We take it all back. Think of waste as a resource. It should be a human resource that we turn into other beautiful things in every category, in every material. That can only be changed by traditional competitors, really, and all parts of the supply chain working together.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're going to open to questions in a moment, but I always like to give a warning so people can think of the questions. But I've got a couple more. Up my sleeve. I'm going to change a little bit, change context a little bit now, because I think so this is maybe a bit more of a personal question, and it's around founder well-being. It's such an important topic right now. It's something that's really close to my heart as well. And I'd love to hear from you about how you manage the demands of growing ReBorn, and you've got massive stockists now that are on the books. Like, how do you manage that with looking after yourself and your wonderful family and getting the dog out for a walk and all of that good stuff? Like, what does that look like for you?
I'm not a good example. Sorry. I am very driven, and I will never be good enough. And it's back to childhood things. And so I will always want to strive for more. I'll never be good enough. So I am my worst critic. But then I guess a lot of us are like that, right? We're always striving for more. So there's an element of that, I'm afraid. I mean, I do use sport and cycling, and friend Ben over there, we do mad adventures of cycling to Paris, and so we'll do collective physical, which is I think spending a little bit of time for yourself, and
active rest.
Yeah, active rest. Yeah, and that, I think, when I think of fear and emotional energy, I think of it as a physical thing, and I try and name it in my body, and I try and locate it, at the risk of going a bit yoga about it. So trying to find, when you feel nerves or you feel anxiety, it's trying to give it a physical location and name in your body, and then say, okay, that's what that is, recognize it, and then try and find okay, I now know it, and I'm going to try and use it as feel the fear and do it anyway, in terms of then have a kind of physical approach to getting it out. I've known that's kind of, I don't know, basic homeschool psychology, but that's my way through it.
I love that. It works.
It works.
Okay, before we hand over and get some questions from the audience, I'd love to hear what excites you most about what's next for ReBorn.
Working with people, working with like-minded people. It's such a joy to be able to connect the dots together, bring people who work in tech to universities to designers to that's where the magic happens, I think, in life often, is when you bring different disciplines together that wouldn't otherwise do that, and then to use that for a force for good. So we've got so many ideas for where this idea of taking waste and turning waste into beautiful things. Although lots of people think that plastic is recycled, I'm afraid it mostly isn't. So something like only 8 or 9% of the plastic we consume ends up being recycled. It's either burnt at best, or it ends up in landfill at worst. So what I get excited about is the people side and the planet side. Let's take waste and make beautiful things out of it. It's a strange idea, but that's my thing.
It's gorgeous. And speaking of gorgeous, before we go to the audience, do you want to, I've been looking at the beautiful products we've got down here, and I feel like it would be a shame not to maybe show them off a little bit.
So yeah, feel free to come up and have a play. Oh yeah, I should have said. So do people know the phrase circular design? Is that a thing, or is it more recycling? I see some nods. I didn't really know this before a couple of years ago. So I thought it was all about recycled and recycling. And that is important, right? Because we waste so much, a lot ends up in landfill. But actually what recycled can sometimes be is still what you call linear design, where something is designed and still with recycled materials, it still ends up in landfill. So what we need to do is to create things that are circular by design, that then ultimately they're cradle to cradle. And Ellen MacArthur does this beautiful kind of, and she had this revelation, I think, when she was going around the world. And so Ellen MacArthur or Kate Raworth are the kind of, for me, the kind of gods in this space. But all I did effectively was to say that whereas most homewares is co-molded together and can't be recycled. So for example, it might have metal actually kind of or plastic wrapped around the metal, so therefore it ends up in landfill. Ours is all separate components. It's not that complicated an idea, but it just means that if this was to get, you'd have to work quite hard to break this. This is recycled Yorkshire steel. It's pretty strong, but it costs 4 times as much as China steel. But anyway, that's another story. But this is, if this gets broken, we can repair it or replace it. Or it can get recycled. Stainless steel is widely recycled. So having that as a separate part is quite a simple idea, right? Rather than just with plastic wrapped around it, makes it part of the circular design. And our factory has a regrinding machine. So let's say this breaks, you can send it back to us, or Biffa who we work with as well. I should have said Biffa, a big part of the journey. They'll collect it. We'll shred it down and we'll turn it into a new ReBorn Again item. And we're just about to launch our first ReBorn Again range, sub-range, which is recycled products, because it's a circular journey. So you're the first to hear. And it will launch in, I think, December, January. And end of December, early January, you can buy ReBorn Again items.
Right, put that in your calendars, people. Yes. Is there anything else you would like to show us?
These are the hangers that will be reborn again, and we're also selling it to Oxwash. Did you know Oxwash? They're another Virgin startup. Andy will know them. Another Virgin startup business, kind of what would you call them? An eco-friendly dry cleaning business, that kind of model. Nice. So fabulous, better use of water, wonderful business. So they're now using reborn hangers. So lots of connections within the Virgin startup community, which is fantastic. And who doesn't need a new hanger, right? So
I always need them. Always need them.
There you go.
Awesome. Well, if you do want to come up and have a look after, please do. But we'd love to open up for questions if anyone has one. Who'd like to go first? Hi. Do you want to say your name, and if you're running a business, you can share about the business and then ask your question?
So I'm Alex, and I just started a sustainable pet furniture brand.
Gorgeous.
The question was around when you were going through the, legals and paperwork with John Lewis. Did they have quite strict requirements, or requirements that you didn't really think about in terms of packaging, in terms of the supply chain to meet?
I just have to repeat the question for the live stream, sorry. So did John Lewis have strict requirements that you had to meet in order to get in with them?
They have a lot of operational and commercial hurdles. So very strong, very long legal documents, very specific operational requirements, how things have to be boxed, which is a shame, because in the life cycle analysis that George and I were looking at only this week, yesterday, one of the things you do is you do a sensitivity analysis. So where's your headroom? So this is 79% less carbon than the exact same product made in the Far East from virgin materials, which is fantastic, right? 79% saving. However, then the question is, all right, that's good. How can you make it even better? One of the ways to make it better is to ship it without a cardboard box, because even though it's recycled card, there's still carbon in making that. However, John Lewis require this in a box to display it and so on. So yes, but back to your question, they had operational requirements and they had lots of commercial requirements. They do have claim, if you like, legal requirements, but they're very strict for their own brand, extremely strict. And they're, for a UK manufactured brand, they're relatively flexible. So it would be slightly different if it was in contact with food. So there are certain kind of registered, but this contact isn't directly in contact with food. So it depends. It varies by sector. Tech would be, you'd have some safety requirements in tech. And you would have some ethical sourcing ones if you were sourcing from outside the UK. So yeah, that's a slightly roundabout answer of saying, yes, there are a lot of hoops actually. Yes. But I'm happy if you want to, like, I would say again, just this part of this is about helping each other, right? So if there are questions or help like this example and you want to just, have a follow-up, I've even got a document from the John Lewis technologist who sent me once, here are all the hurdles for different categories. So I could easily, I don't know if that's allowed. I could talk you through what's relevant for your category, if that's helpful.
Perfect, thank you. Hi.
Hello, my name is Tony. I head up a sustainable product design agency, and I guess I'm kind of a founder in that respect, but over the years. So this kind of resonates on both those levels for me. But I wanted to ask about greenwashing. You mentioned life cycle assessment, that kind of thing. How do you navigate greenwashing, make sure you're avoiding it? How do you make sure customers are kind of getting authentic messaging from you? And how do you operate in a space where actually a lot of other brands are quite openly greenwashing effectively in the messaging that are actually products?
So this question is about greenwashing and how you navigate that.
Yeah, there's two answers to that question. So first of all, I'm going to talk about, I think it's about being honest. And I think as an entrepreneur, we always walk this tightrope of kind of chutzpah, or in the old school word, having some cojones, being strong and having this real belief in yourself together with being humble. And I think there's that whole thing. And I'm always try to slightly go on the humble side, like, although maybe I come across not that way, but like I so don't know anything about most things. Like there's so much more in every single field that I can possibly know. I'm not a scientist. I'm not an environmental scientist. I love this. I appreciate the people who are. I'm not a product designer, so I think that sustainability for me is one of those things where I just have to say, look, I'm just on a journey. It's just a journey. And the 79% is an example of that. Like, I'll do everything I can to make this the best possible thing in homewares. But is it perfect? No, it's not. It's in a box, for starters. It should be in a wrap, and I will say to John that I'm meeting them next Wednesday. Can we just try some of the products in a wrap? And if we can, we'll save X percent. I can increase my claim from 79% to, we don't know the percentage. I'm still working with George on what that percentage is, but we can certainly improve that percentage. So I think, to your point, it's about absolutely not saying that you're perfect. There is nothing perfect in this world, for me anyway. So admitting your own failings, saying you're on a journey, and being transparent. I think the other point about, yes, there is a huge amount in this space, and it does upset me because there's, and I won't name them, but there are other people in this category that are making terrible claims that I think are completely misleading. And I think I can't bring myself to say that it's public, to say it publicly, but I will say it behind the scenes, because I think it's part of education, is to say, we need to raise the bar in all of these areas. So I will use, when I meet those people that are in those companies, I will say, look, we have a duty of responsibility here to improve, to tackle climate change, and you can be part of the solution. What you're doing over here is part of the problem. And if I'm doing stuff wrong, feel free to tell me too. I'm not perfect. So those are my two answers: be truthful and humble, and behind the scenes, be a kind of friendly critic, if you like, for the people that are doing it wrong.
I love that. I was going to see if we have any questions online, but we don't know. You're over there. Where's he gone? Hi.
how did you do the kind of consumer research piece, especially kind of like given the budget required, budget and stuff like that. So we've done kind of like Viber and things like that.
Yes.
But just curious how you've done it, because you mentioned about there's people that say they like it, there's stuff that they will actually buy.
This is a question about customer research and how you approached it with budget constraints early on.
Yeah. So I think the single most important thing for marketing or sales is to do market research. It's have the voice of the customer, and is to have a combination of qualitative and quantitative for me personally. And so qualitative is it can just your friends and family. That can be where it starts. Just to get insights, to get ideas, to get thoughts, to get the we love that and so on. And then so I have a panel that I use, but anyone can use it. It's called Taluna. I have no vested interest or shareholding in Taluna, but it's a panel, a quantitative panel. So you can, and there are others available, I'm sure, where you can, and they can do it anywhere in the world, and you can basically recruit hundreds, if not thousands of people. And it costs money. I mean, each one of those costs me, I think about £1,000 for 100 people. But for me, it was worthwhile spending £1,000. And it's even then, you're self-serve. You've got to write the questionnaire yourself, etc. But what you get back from that is, basically data you can share to John Lewis, so you can prove. So it gives you your part of your. I used it in my startup pitch to Holly and the team. So I use it with investors. Here's the gap. I've got quantitative data to prove it. I did bench my product versus competitors in that research. So yeah, that was my tool. And I'm again, if you want to kind of catch up on afterwards, I'm more than happy to, share with you the tool that I used.
Yeah, and I mean, if it gets you the investment or the deal, it kind of pays for itself then.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Hi.
Hi, my name is Lamia and I just started a peanut butter brand. So my question is, when it comes to retail for a startup brand, is it really profitable or is it just an avenue for visibility to consumers?
So this question is about whether the retail route for startups is really profitable or whether it's more about visibility for the brand.
Yeah, my accountant was here. She would say she would say John Lewis is purely an advertising play. Isn't that pretty shocking? Like I'm in 34. I'm in every single John Lewis. I'm selling thousands of products, a month now. I've only been launched for 2 months now, but and yet she would say, yeah, it's not for profit. It's it's incredible, isn't it? Because I won't, because it's confidential information. I can't say, but they do require a large margin, a very large margin. And these products, as I say, cost a lot to make in the UK, plus the setup costs. So I also have my website, and that, if you want to buy a product, please buy it on my website. Although John Lewis is great too. So yeah, it's brutal. It's brutal, the margins of retail. So I think a good strategy is a twin track strategy, whereby you are using particularly bricks and mortar retail, because John Lewis is one of the few places where you can actually launch a new brand and tell the story. It's harder to do in Amazon and eBay and other, because people are already, if you like, at the final click element of their search. So I'm sure if Amazon were here, if I had met with them earlier today, they would tell a very different story. But for my mind, it's hard to launch a brand on Amazon, where it's wonderful to do it in John Lewis, because you can tell the story of the brand. So I don't begrudge them for their margin. They've got very expensive. They pay a lot of UK tax. They have wonderful partners that work in their store. But to your point, I would recommend a two-track strategy. One is direct, where you have decent margin, and it's where you look for repeat business and you build a loyal customer base. And the other is retail for advertising purposes. Good question. Great question.
Oh. Can we go behind and then we'll come back to you? Sorry.
My name is Lana. I actually work in financial services. My question is around, have there been any surprises for you in the products that have had the best uptake from customers? And linked to that, how have you been able to manage the manufacturing supply to meet that demand?
So this question is about how have you had any particular products that had a surprising uptake, and how did you manage that?
Yeah, so I pretty much knew because I'd done the research and it mostly played out, but so I tested loads of different colors in research, but I didn't really know until you see it in product. So which do you think, so I've got 2 colorways. I tried greens and blues and swirls and all these wonderful things, and people said, no, I want it to look like my kitchen, so it has to be gray or stone. So these are the colors that we launched with. So this is a light, I don't know if you can see, it's quite soft lighting, but this is a stone, this is our stone range. I feel like QVC, and this is the dark gray range. The surprise for me was which was more popular. So not the product range. I kind of knew which ones were the most popular, and the dish racks were the most popular. But in terms of colorways, let's do a quick show of hands of who do you think. So I'm going to ask you: are you a dark grey person for your home, or are you a stone person? So let's start with the dark grey. Who would choose dark grey? So we've got about a third of the. Okay, exactly. Okay, brilliant. And so does that mean for the stone? Oh, majority stone.
Andy, did you go for the stone? Yeah.
Okay, so the surprise for me was, it's a bit of a trick question, because in the end, it wasn't exactly 50-50 between the two, but it varied by product. So the washing up bowl and the dish racks the smaller items were the stone items, and the larger items were grey. And that was and I don't really know the logic of that, and I still haven't worked out quite why that was. So that was the surprise. What was the there was a 2-parter question.
The second part was in terms of the manufacturing.
Yes.
With the demand
Yes.
for products we're selling the most.
Yes. So that is a nightmare. Matching manufacturing. So I'm very lucky. So one of the nice things about having a really small supply chain. So if you were, most other people in this world would sources from a factory in the Far East, and then they would have knock-on suppliers, so the raw materials, etc. So the supply chain would be months, and B, very disconnected. So they wouldn't even know who their factories were outsourcing to. So this is lovely. So I work with Biffa, thanks to George, who made the introduction, at Brunel, who supplied the raw material of the plastics, etc. So yes, it's a nightmare, because John Lewis will suddenly say, oh, by the way, we need an extra 3,000 hangers tomorrow. Have you got that? And I will say no, but I can at least say I can deliver in a month. And the reason I can do that is because I can phone up my lovely friends at Biffa and say, I need help me with the raw material. And then my lovely friends in the factory, where the BBC are coming tomorrow to shoot, and they can kind of squeeze me in, and I'll bribe them with, I don't know, coffee and chocolate and sweets and things. So yeah. So lucky to have a low supply chain, which is another thing that I sold into John Lewis, by the way, because most of their supply chains are very distant. So they have very long reactive supply chains. They have to place orders months, sometimes 6 months in advance. Whereas for me, I can get it down to 2 weeks.
Awesome. I think you had another question.
Yeah, this could be a long answer, but how do you find social commerce and try to win all TikTok and stuff like that? And also, what's kind of your kind of feedback on the possibility of GDC? As your because they asked them, it's everything's quite tax quite high and stuff like that. So just feedback on that.
Yeah.
So this question is about your approach to social commerce, like TikTok and so on, and the profitability of that route.
Yes. So social media influencers, whether like it or not, is a massive part of this category, because people talk about their homes and sustainability and home organization, as well as home decor, within the context of social media a lot. And the two main channels are Instagram and TikTok, as you said. And TikTok, within their TikTok shop environment, have nailed it way more than Facebook have, because the influencers can monetize that quite directly by you can sell within the TikTok. You're not leaving the TikTok platform. You can purchase from within it. I haven't cracked it yet at all. I'm working with influencers on that right now. Ben is over there is helping me with it. So I'm busy trying to, if anyone knows great ways to crack it or great case studies, I would be all ears. So I'm trying different things a lot. I'm sending out free products to people in return for them showcasing their products on their platforms. So the honest answer is I would love to do more social commerce. Where I've had more success is just old-fashioned Google PPC. So I am running campaigns at the moment that are more on Echo, the other brand that but where I can get a good return on old school return on investment. But I would love to do it on social commerce, but I haven't cracked it yet.
Awesome. How are we doing for time? We're out of time. Oh, I have loved this conversation so
Thank
much.
you.
I've loved the show and tell. That's just such a highlight. But thank you for being so open and honest and just telling us about your amazing journey. I think we've all learned something. I've definitely learned something. I can't wait to write up my notes tomorrow and put that out. But can we just give a warm round of applause for Brian?